So, body transformation. We expect you guys to transform your bodies over the next 5 weeks. Challenge means it's gonna be hard, right? So, whereas I just mentioned, I have some dark chocolate, have some wine. For the next 5 weeks, I won't. I'm gonna do the challenge with you guys. Nice. And I would recommend that you guys do not either. And so, after the challenge, you find the variations, the things you can add back in. Maybe you find, okay, I do okay with this. I feel bad when I have this though, so I'm going to keep that out. But you might be able to find a few of those things you're avoiding. You can add back in with success, but we want to find a baseline that you can measure from. We want you guys to have a standard line, a feeling of wellness. That way when you add things in one at a time, you can find, where do you succeed, where do you start to falter. That kind of makes sense. This is going to be hard, and that's all right. So what's the best diet? Yeah, the one that works for you. The one I would go further to say the one that you can sustain, the one that you can maintain, the one that you can stick to. So I really am not a huge fan of the concept of a paleo challenge. Actually, I think. For some people with an autoimmune disease, needing extreme weight loss is a great way to kind of get a kickstart and kind of defog yourself, get over some addictions to sugar, that sort of thing. But I think it also sets you up to do something hard for 5 weeks, and then after the 5 weeks you're done and you go back to the way you're eating. And if you don't maintain whatever changes you made, you're not going to maintain whatever results you made. So, if you did the Paleo Challenge last year and lost a bunch of weight, and then you went back to eating, drinking, and smoking and joking, you probably gained a lot of that weight back. Right? You just, so my goals for any sound diet is I'd like you to eat healthful foods in quantities that support your athletic performance without sustaining body fat. That's also sustainable in the long run. Those are all key components. We want healthful foods. We want enough food to perform, enough food to fuel your organ function. If you eat too little, things start slowing down. We don't want so much that we gain body fat, and we want it something that you can enjoy for the rest of your life. So I'm looking for a lifestyle change, not a diet. Cool. So again, like I mentioned, today we're going to talk about kind of food quality, and we're going to use paleo as a model for that. We're going to talk about food quantity, minus an N, I guess, forgot the N in that, but quantity. And that'll be zone, we'll talk about that. And they're certainly not mutually exclusive. And again, like I mentioned, we'll talk about the rules of the challenge. So, before we kind of get into that, I do want to lay some baseline science. We're going to talk about kind of some of the hormones in our blood. We're going to talk about some of the different types of fats, inflammation, acid-base balance, all that good stuff. So hold on for just 2 seconds. I forgot who we were. Sweet. So right here we have a graph. Visual, right? On the x-axis we have time, T. On the y-axis we have Bg for blood glucose. Okay? So for blood glucose, we all have sugar in our blood right now, every single one of you. We have a range. We like it right in this range. So we don't want it too low. We don't want it too high. What happens when blood sugar gets low? Dizzy, shaky, angry, paranoia, wanting to call the fire department. What happens when blood sugar gets too high? Headaches. Jitters, yeah. Well, let's think about it this way. So, higher blood sugar means your concentration of sugar in your blood is increasing, which means that it's going to be, let's think about syrup versus juice. What are the attributes of syrup versus juice? It's thick, it's more viscous, right? So if you have more viscous blood, that's going to be flowing less effectively. It's going to be creating more pressure at the vessel level, and you'll see, risk for things like strokes and heart attacks increase in people suffering from diabetes. So we don't want our blood too thick. We don't want it too thin. Just like your Kool-Aid. You don't want Kool-Aid at all, but you don't want Kool-Aid. You don't want Kool-Aid without sugar because it's super sour, but you also don't want too much sugar because it's too sweet, right? So we want to be just right. So we want our sugar right in these kind of middle ranges. Fasting, you guys do not need to write this down, don't need to know this, but fasting we want about 70 to 110. After meal, we want to keep it below 140, about an hour later. But let's take like a 1950s typical American breakfast of, you know, cornflakes, skim milk, banana, orange juice, toast with, you know, low-fat margarine or jam, right? What are the attributes of that meal?
Carbohydrates.
Really high carbs, right? What's it lacking?
Protein.
Not much protein, probably not much fat either. So what's going to happen to our blood glucose when we have that meal? Spike. How much is it going to spike? A lot. Come on. So it goes way up. And remember, so that's where we go from, so this is our blood vessels right here. This is kind of like our happy medium, and this is what with more sugar in it. Little blue dots are sugar. Yeah. We don't like it all super high and thick, right? We don't like our blood sugar high. The body goes into a state of alarm. It can be fatal. So, how do we get that blood sugar down?
Exercise.
How do we get the blood sugar down immediately after a meal? What's your body's response to that? Insulin. Yeah. So, insulin is a hormone that the body secretes. Let's make insulin this red line. The body starts secreting that. And insulin's job is to take sugar from the bloodstream and to put it other places. And where does it put it? Sugar can go into your muscles, and it can go into the liver. Your muscles can store about 400 grams of carbohydrate. Liver can store about 100 grams. Neat. So insulin facilitates the move of sugar from the bloodstream into your cells. Now, what happens when your muscles get full and your livers get full? If you have a 20-gallon gas tank in your car and you put 20 gallons of gas in it, what happens to the 21st gallon? Spills out, yeah. So these are going to spill out, and they're going to spill out into adipose, or fat cells. So you can create fat from sugar. That happens in the liver, mostly. Weird. So as this sugar is going from the bloodstream into these cells, we would notice that our blood sugar is doing what? Going down. Yeah. Now here's your problem. Insulin is a protein-based hormone. It's not super sensitive, and so it's up. It's got a half-life. It's going to be up for a certain amount of time, and so your blood sugar doesn't just come back down to normal and just like, cool, I'm going to stay there. It keeps going. What happens? Halloween. Kids go out. Tons of candy. Bouncing off the walls. Sugar spike. What happens an hour later? Crash, yeah. So we have a rebound effect where we go hypoglycemic. And that's again when we start feeling that dizzy, that faint, that nauseous. So your body is in a state of alarm. What's it want to do?
Get more sugar.
Wants to get that sugar back up. Yeah. So what do? You crave sugary foods. And you eat sugary foods. You eat something hearty and sugar goes way back up. And here's the problem. In this situation, your blood sugar is low. But we've just established that we've taken all this sugar and put it into cells. So, what's the problem? Is insulin blocks the release of sugar from cells back in the bloodstream. So insulin is, in many ways, Katie's a med school student, so don't hate me for simplifying some of the processes. In many ways, insulin is like a one-way hormone. So sugars go this way, and they don't go this way. So we've got these full tanks of sugar down here, but we can't get them into the bloodstream. And so we have to eat more sugar to get it back in the bloodstream. And then we get a big spike, we get a big crash, and then we put it back in the cells. They're already full, so we start making more body fat. And that's a huge problem with why we're having trouble. And you know, it's normal to be overweight now, and especially the last 20 years. And so that's a huge deal. Is we want to kind of mitigate this insulin response. I would much rather see a blood sugar response where we have a very kind of slow and steady increase and a slow and moderate decrease. This is happening over 4 or 5 hours instead of every hour. A lot of you guys have probably read articles suggesting like eat every 2 hours to stoke your metabolic fire. Those articles are usually also, and that works for some people, but those articles are usually also recommending, you know, high carb, kind of low fat meals, and that's eating every 2 hours to deal with these spikes. On a typical morning's breakfast, I don't like using myself as an example, but so we'll just say this other guy, Steve, I know, but he has, you know, 3-4 eggs, and he has an apple, and with those eggs, he sautés in some spinach, maybe has a cup of coffee. And 5 hours later, he's not hungry. 5 hours later, he has to look at the clock, or he has to tell this other coach, I haven't eaten since blah, blah, blah. I should probably eat. And, you know, so that's because blood sugar is normal. Guess what? Even if I haven't eaten for 5 hours, I've got some sugar in my muscles and sugar in my liver. And guess what? Even a very lean person has enough body fat on them. Even Ben has enough body fat on him that if he was put to the task, he could go out and walk 100 miles, actually up to 900 miles, just on the body fat stored on his body. Now, would he want to do that mentally? Probably not, but he has enough energy stored. So, can you go 2 hours without a meal? Yes. Should you? Maybe, maybe not. But you have enough energy. It's not there. You're not going to like starve. Your body will most likely just stabilize his blood sugars and figure it out. So here's another problem though, is you know, getting to where you can do this and be happy when it takes time. If your body has what's called low insulin sensitivity, you've got kind of higher insulin in the bloodstream all the time, you're going to be more prone to more of these spikes and crashes, and you won't feel as good going periods without eating. But over time, as we fix your metabolism, we can get there. That kind of makes sense. Cool. I know that's kind of like some heavy stuff, but I think that is very useful for kind of understanding some of these mechanisms at play. Any questions on that? Yes, ma'am.
If you are eating high protein breakfast and you still are hungry,
Is that like immediately after eating, or is that?
No, just a few hours later, like 2 or 3 hours later. Is it okay to just have vegetables and stuff like that?
Now that high protein breakfast, is it also including some vegetables?
Always eggs and another protein like some high quality meat and veggies.
Yeah. Yeah, and, you know, if you had to have a small snack, it's fine. Just again, make it kind of something normal. You know, something within the lines of what we'll talk about here in a bit. So, and you might actually, sounds like you know, you're not including the carbohydrate in that as much. Veggies have a small amount. Common misconception is that paleo has to be low carb. It's going to be lower carb than what we normally do, but you guys are working your asses off in here. You guys are working hard. The type of work we do is very anaerobic. You are going to have a baseline need for some carbohydrate. So, you know, maybe adding like a half a sweet potato to that breakfast, even though it's adding would actually make you sustain for longer. You might just be needing some carbohydrate. But yes, ma'am.
Do you always have to have breakfast?
Yeah.
I would recommend it. I would recommend it for our purposes here with the amount of intensity we do here. There's some stuff out there called like intermittent fasting, and I actually recommend avoiding breakfast, but that's usually not in the presence of, you know, 11 on a scale of 10 workouts. So that's not doing filthy 50 last night or 30 bear crawls today. So I wouldn't recommend skipping breakfast. Have some protein with breakfast. Yeah, go show. Cool. So, kind of cramped my style up here, but let's look at this piece. So, we talked about you eat carbohydrates, you secrete insulin. Insulin causes sugars to go into cells. Insulin causes storage. Insulin's a storage hormone. In a very, very simplistic sense, when you eat protein, you secrete a hormone called glucagon. Glucagon actually kind of has this opposite effect where it does let sugars go into the bloodstream. It mobilizes things. It mobilizes sugars and kind of mobilizes some fatty acids, adipose. So if she was back there, my dog's back there. I forgot she was in the room. All right, so insulin storage. Glucagon is mobilization. Would you say as a population, do we have too much storage going on or too much mobilization?
Too much
Too much storage, yeah. So on average, we're probably eating too much carbs and not enough protein. On average. Not necessarily you, or you, but on average. Cool. In the middle is fat. So let's say here's a teeter-totter of insulin, protein. Got some dumbbells. Coming in, shipping. We've got insulin, glucagon, protein, carbs, storage, and mobilization. Fat's going to be kind of in the middle. Fat doesn't necessarily cause storage directly. When insulin is high and you eat fat, you're going to store that fat. But when insulin is low and you eat fat, it's, maybe you burn it, maybe you don't. But fat has almost like a lightning rod effect where it kind of minimizes the spikes on both ends. It also causes the release of a hormone called CCK, or cholecystokinin, and that leads to satiation or feeling of kind of fullness, satisfaction, and it tastes good, right? So, kind of at the end of the day, what I want to make sure we're doing is at every meal I want to have some protein. We want to make sure that we don't have too much carbohydrate, but some is needed. I would like to try to make sure that those carbohydrates are from a healthier source, something that digests more slowly, something that's fibrous or bulky like veggies or fruit, something kind of whole, and again, not too much of it. So every meal, I feel like, should include not too much carbohydrate, but from healthier sources. It should have some protein, it should have some fat, it should have some fiber as well. We want kind of a balanced meal. Cool. So, that's the most intense thing we'll talk about all day, I promise. Cool. You guys are doing good. Omega-3s and omega-6s. How many of you guys have heard of omega-3s? How many of you have heard of fish oil? Right, cool. Omega-3s are in fish oil. Fish oils have omega-3s. So, why is fish oil recommended? Or why would someone recommend fish oil?
To balance out the 3s and the 6s.
Yeah. Why is that? Why is that?
If you have too many 6s, that can lead to inflammation.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, fish oil, which is high omega-3s. Omega-3s, when supplemented in the diet, can give you benefits to cardiovascular health, benefits to, skin clearance, that sort of stuff, benefits to body fat, body composition, reduction to cancer. There's some nutrient partitioning effects where calories you eat along with fish oil are somewhat more likely to go into muscle versus going into fat. I mean, there's lots of cool effects with fish oil. Now, it's important. Omega-3s are a type of fat, and they are anti-inflammatory, which means they reduce inflammation. Inflammation is a process in the body. Cells get irritated, their function alters, and it screws things up. We don't like it. Omega-6s, which are going to be found in grain-fed meats, corn oil, peanut oil, a lot of our kind of processed salad oils, are pro-inflammatory, so they increase inflammation. And so we've got kind of another teeter-totter of inflammation and anti-inflammation, and you kind of want those in balance. You do need some inflammation. When your body has an injury, it gets inflamed, and that's part of your healing response. But on average, we're way inflamed. People are way inflamed, and they're finding more and more that's kind of linked to metabolic diseases and cancers and maybe even diabetes and different things. So we want to keep inflammation in check. Now, interesting thing with omega-3s. So omega-3s are going to be found in fish. They're found in animals that are fed grass-fed, free-range, pastured animals. They're found in small amounts in walnuts and flax. Also grass-fed butter, kind of dairy that comes from animals that feed on grass. So if you think about it, what we eat affects our health, right? If we eat bad food, we have funky blood and we're not healthy. Well, what animals eat affects their health too. So just like we're not designed to eat Skittles, Skittle salad. Sorry, we had a inside joke. We're not designed to eat Skittles and taquitos, right? Animals aren't meant to feed on corn. That's a recent development. So when animals like cows and chickens eat grass, they accumulate omega-3s in the bloodstream, and they're relatively healthy. When animals eat corn, they accumulate omega-6s, and they become unhealthy. And it also kind of affects your metabolism, so they need to have like antibiotics and have a high acid thing, and have increased salmonella risk and all these different things. But animals are meant to eat grass. And so the same way that what we eat affects our health, what they eat affects their health. If we go on to eat them, we have this kind of food chain accumulation of bad stuff. So we want to kind of correct that omega-3, omega-6 balance, and that's going to be a big part of what we looked at today too. Inflammation, I already talked about. Now, acid-base balance. Most foods cause acid, or have an acidic response in the body. Fruits and vegetables have a base or an alkaline or reduction in acid response when you eat them. And so, on average, we have too much acid. Having too much acid in the blood causes the release of nutrients such as calcium from your bones. You also have a lot of acidic response to exercise already, so eating more fruits and veggies can help us to buffer those acidic byproducts of exercise. So we want to kind of balance out this acid-base balance too. So overall, by and large, I'm not even leaving the room. Overall, by and large, qualities of a good diet can be plentiful in plant foods. Lots and lots of green plant foods, lots of things that grew from the ground. Adequate protein. We want to look for avoiding sugars and processed foods. We want to have inclusion of healthy fats. We already talked about omega-3s and omega-6s being fats, but are there other healthy fats? No, it's yes or no? Is olive oil good for you? Is a Mediterranean diet, helpful? Maybe. Why is fat important in the diet other than inflammation?
Good fat burns fat.
Fat can burn fat, maybe, yeah. Yeah, it makes you feel full, makes you feel satisfied. It's a source of energy. I already mentioned that kind of lightning rod effect. There's also certain vitamins that are called fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, and those 4 vitamins, which are crucial to your health, can't be absorbed if you don't have fat with them. So if any of you guys take vitamin D, which I strongly recommend, if you take it on an empty stomach, you're not going to absorb it. You need to have some fat with that vitamin in order to actually use it. So we need some fat in the diet. What are the qualities of a good diet? It needs to have sufficient amounts of vitamins and minerals. I mentioned vitamin D, but there's iron, magnesium, selenium, even sodium. We do need some. Controls inflammation, and then last but not least, should be sustainable and enjoyable. So doing like the baked dry chicken and broccoli diet isn't going to last for very long, no matter how hard your willpower is. You want to have foods that you like and enjoy. Cool. So that's kind of like an overview of kind of the pre-sciencey stuff, and that's going to lay a baseline for all of our different topics today. Those qualities of a good diet are going to be true whether you're doing a vegetarian diet, whether you're doing a paleo diet, whether you're doing a zone diet, a cabbage diet, which probably wouldn't be any of those things, but those qualities of a good diet would be good criteria to evaluate if that diet is good or not. Is it adequate in protein? Is it adequate on its vitamins and minerals? Is it sustainable, enjoyable? Is it helpful? Those are all the things we want to see regardless of your eating strategy. Cool. So, in a moment here, we'll move on. We're going to talk about paleo specifically. I'm going to talk about the what and why of paleo. Stephanie will talk a little about kind of the how, practical applications. You guys don't have to listen to me all day. Which is great. And then Ben's going to talk about zone and kind of get more into quantities. Any questions on the sciencey stuff? Cool. Either that's very thorough or very boring. So, we'll move over to whiteboard number 2, camera number 2. So, paleo is going to be a dietary strategy mostly based on quality of food. Like I mentioned earlier, many people think paleo is going to be a low-carb diet, and it tends to be lower, but it doesn't have to be. There's a society in Africa called the P.A.W, and they eat tons of sweet potatoes and yams, and their diet is like 90% starch. But it's again from healthful foods, and they're still healthy. So, not saying you should do that. But paleo doesn't have to be low carb, and it's pretty ambiguous as far as macronutrients, carbs, proteins, and fats are concerned. It's all about just wholeness of food, quality of food. So I'm going to talk about kind of the origins of the paleo diet, and then I'm going to talk about the foods that are generally included, ones that are avoided. For those of you who are just here for information, awesome. I think the better you can get to this side of the spectrum and the less you are over there, the better off you're going to be. For those of you guys doing the challenge is to stick to this. If you're doing paleo. So, paleo is all about eating real food versus food products. So, your grandparents, or maybe your great-grandparents, depending on your generation, when they were going to eat a meal, they had no choice but to eat real food. Something that grew from the ground, ran, flew, swam, squeaked, or barked at some point in time, right? It was all real food. They didn't have things in packages with 2-year shelf lives, that sort of thing. You cold? You can turn up the heat, turn up to like 60, 65. See, I'm tuned to your needs.
Giving you life.
What? Just giving you life, giving you heat, warmth. I like it. Really crank it up. What is lost with the standard American diet? You guys ready for the walk right there? Everyone draw your attention to play. You can even turn your camera for a second.
I have one. The ability to cook your own food.
Oh, so people lose that as a habit. That's especially true. Especially true. Yeah. So this audience has probably about 75-80% women right now. How many of you women are like, I got this in the kitchen? Not half, yeah. I mean, had I asked that question 100 years ago, you guys all would have been like,
Yeah.
so, yeah, true. It's just a different habit. But, on the other side, you're like, I got this in the office. You know, you guys have jobs and you're professionals and, you know, you have a lot more freedoms than you used to, so you can't cook, it's a trade-off. That's right. If I ask that question to men, a lot of you guys probably now are like, yeah, I can cook versus 100 years ago. And they're like, she doesn't cook. So it's just a different society altogether. But that's very interesting. So what else is lost? What's lost? So last year I had a big slide presentation. I've decided not to use slides anymore. But I showed some pictures of kind of x-rays of children and their legs were all like bowed out like that. And they had rickets. Yeah, it's a disease of vitamin D deficiency. In adults, it's called osteomalacia. And it's typically thought of as only being seen in like third world, you know, eating dirt and clay countries. And the population we've seen a huge increase in lately is actually overweight children. Overweight children in America. So these are children in Oakland, California, of all things, had a very, very high just spike, like 10 times the national average sort of spike. Now you have this population who's overweight, so they're obviously getting plenty of calories, plenty of food. They're over-energied, but they're still malnourished, still under-nutrition. Why?
The lunches and the breakfasts that are being served in the schools are all carb and very small.
Of the other stuff, right? Yeah. Processed food. What's up, John?
Also, depending on demographics and where they live, in a lot of inner city areas, there's just aren't grocery stores. So when they have money to go shopping, there's so much money to buy what's there.
Yeah, and with that demographic thing is really good. You said when they have money, and so I mean, food that's not healthy is cheap. Eating healthy is expensive. Coincidentally, so are buying medications and things. And so I'm a strong believer that you get your healthy food now, and then you save money on medications later on in life. You save money on doctor's visits and co-pays. So it's just straight off. But yeah, and you guys have probably heard the term, you know, empty calories, right? It's food that has energy. Think sugar, think kind of white flour. Has some statistics. You know, I had a lisp when I was younger. I couldn't pronounce S's very well. Statistics. I think about 380 calories came from processed sugars, just added sugars to the diet per day, and 420 calories on average American came from like white flour and rich white flour. So that's totals to 800 calories or 700 calories, depending on how good the math is. That's about a third of our kind of average caloric recommendation, just from completely just empty calories without nutritive value. It's crap. We got a couple examples here. So baby formula. So nutrition itself, the concept of nutrition, the field of nutrition, is very new. So we discovered vitamin C like 1914, roughly. Think about like astronomy and physics and stuff. These things have been around for hundreds of years. Nutrition as a science is like within the last 100 years, 120 years. In the, I think 1890-ish. Is that a train?
It's Thomas.
1890, his name was Justus von Liebig. One of the first nutritionists, if you want to call it that, made a baby formula. And it was made out of sodium bicarbonate, like baking soda, cornstarch, powdered milk, one other element, but not much. It had a little bit of protein, it had some carbs, had some fights, and even had a little bit of like trace elements, like minerals in it. They gave that to babies, just a mixture of powdered milk and cornstarch and baking soda. What do you think of that? That's, I should be saying it smiling. It's terrible. A lot of them died. What do you think happened? Dead babies. It's terrible. A lot of them got sick. A lot of them died. 15 years later, 1914, they discovered vitamin C. They discovered folate, folic acid, neural tube effects, all that stuff. They discovered iron, all these different vitamins. And now they add those to baby formula. But are formula-fed children, do they, on average, do as well as breastfed children? No. So what else is missing?
The mother.
The mother. There you go. Maybe nurturing, suckling. We just can't recreate real food from chemicals, no matter how hard we try. And we're still learning more. So 1914, we discovered, and that's probably not even the right year, but it's close. We discovered vitamin C. Well, in the last few years, we've discovered things like lycopene and lutein and beta-carotene and cyanoxanthine, whatever. And you guys have heard of some of those. Lutein. What about resveratrol? It's a compound in red wine that might be helpful for us. Lutein may protect, I think, eyesight. Lycopene, maybe prostate. These are classes of nutrients called phytonutrients. They're smaller than vitamins. They're microscopic compared to vitamins. They're very, very tiny. We don't know a ton about them, but we know that they have some pretty neat effects, and they seem to be protective in many ways. You guys, I'm sure, have heard of beta-carotene, right? And like I mentioned, I'm sure you've heard of lutein or lycopene, or seen some of those, or even adding lycopene to Centrum, AZ now, which is neat. But a single sprig of thyme, that garden variety herb that you can put in your food, has over 44 different phytonutrients in it. I can only pronounce like one or two, so I'm not going to, but there's literally thousands of these nutrients. So no matter, even if we add the lycopene and the beta-carotene, well, what about the other 9,998 of them? Let's not put them in our food. And a lot of these phytonutrients, phyto means what? Plant. Yeah. Plant nutrients, they're also living nutrients. And so they're killed with that kind of heat process. So, huge problem. So paleo wants to focus on real food, wants to focus on those plants, wants to keep those phytonutrients intact, wants to keep those kind of weird, funky, franken foods out of the diet. It has its origins, ancestral origins. You've probably heard of it called as like the caveman diet, which is funny, but it's almost doing worse for the taught type of paleo because it makes it kind of more seem like a fad. It's not a fad. It's how we lived for thousands, potentially millions of years up until recently. It's not a fad, it's just the way we lived up until we effed things up. I almost threw that F-bomb. But I didn't, because I'm on camera, right? So it has origins from our evolution, what we kind of evolved to eat on. And we seem to have done okay in the past. A big thing we look at is pre-agriculture versus post-agriculture. So the agricultural revolution, 10 to 20,000 years ago, if you look at our kind of lifespan as a humanity, as a football field, let's say, 10, 20,000 years ago constitutes like a few inches. So we did 1,000 burpees in an hour, like Brad. Agricultural revolution was the last burpee. Those first 999 proved that. So pretty recently that we had agriculture. Up until then, we were hunter-gatherers. We traveled around. We hunted. We hunted and gathered. Right? We ate berries, right? Veggies, a lot of plant food. We didn't have fields of corn or wheat. We didn't farm, crops like the way we do. We didn't have a huge amount of grains in our diet. So huge differences. Weston A. Price is a really interesting concept in this kind of paleo concept. So Weston A. Price, has anyone heard of him? Weston A. Price was a dentist. He was a dentist, and he wanted to study populations in their natural state. He wanted to look at hunter-gatherers who are still living today. So there's still small pockets, like the pygmies and the Aborigines and the Inuit Eskimo before their populations got, I think they have McDonald's up there now. Terrible. But he looked at these kind of populations in their natural state, and he was actually interested in dental health. And so interesting, they don't brush their teeth. They don't have toothbrushes and, the pygmies, but they had like a layer of slime on their teeth. It was kind of weird, like a plaque, but when he scraped it away, their teeth were just pearly white. They were perfect, no cavities or anything like that. They didn't have any sugar in their diet. They had a weird plaque because they don't clean them, but they still didn't have any tooth decay. He started looking around. He also saw, they were all very lean and, athletic, even though they didn't have CrossFit. He kind of asked him and kind of interviewed him and stuff, and he couldn't find any cases of people talking about, cancers or diabetes or heart disease. Just didn't happen. They were all very healthy. And so he started looking at the nutrition things and the concept of their diet. They all just ate real food. They lived off the land. They were all extremely healthy. They actually did some studies where they took these populations and they westernized them a little bit. They started giving westernized foods and breads and sandwiches and things like that. And they developed metabolic disease very rapidly. They started developing insulin resistance, increases in blood pressure, blood sugar, and all this funky stuff. They took that food away, and they got healthy again. It's pretty cool. So Weston A. Price, there's actually a foundation called Weston A. Price Foundation.